Thank you for stopping by. Please like my video and subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell so that you won't miss any new videos I upload. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is take some sample fabric, and in my case I'm using about 2 yards of muslin, and we're going to drape this fabric over the chair. At this point we're trying to make a template of the chair so that we then can go back and use it to cut out the actual fabric. I'm ensuring that it's long enough in the front and that it's nice and even along the front and the back. Here I'm ensuring that the fabric is even, going crosswise or widthwise, and then I'm moving it over slightly so I can have just enough fabric to pin along the curve of the chair, trying to conserve as much fabric as possible so that I can later use it for something else possibly. So now I'm bringing the fabric edges together, and then I'm going to pin along the curve of the chair, beginning from the top to the bottom. And at the top of the chair is much wider, and as you go down it gets narrower to the base of the chair. So I'm pinning all the way to the bottom, and then I'm going back up, rearranging the pins, leaving enough room within the fabric so that the slip cover can easily go on and off. So now I want to do the same thing on the opposite side. But first, once again, I'm making sure that the fabric is nice and smooth and even. And then I'm going to pin as much fabric as I need to follow the shape of the chair on this side. Again, leaving enough space so that the slip cover can easily go on and off. Okay, so now I'm going back to the other side and rearranging the pins so that the fabric remains smooth on both sides, the front and the back, with no wrinkles. Okay, everything's looking good. The front's looking good, nice and smooth. The side is looking good. The front is looking good. The back is looking good. And notice how the fabric is just hugging the curve of the chair. But I'm going to run into a little snag, because the way that I have it fitted now, there's no issue if I wanted to put a zipper in the back. That's the only way the way I pinned it just now would work. So currently as it is now, I can't even take the slip cover off because it's fitted so well. The bottom is narrow and the top is wide. But it's all good because I'm going to work it out in the end. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off that excess fabric on that side. You see there's a lot of fabric left that I can make some sample anything with. I'm going to turn around in a second, don't worry. So I'm just going to cut along the side of my pins, leaving enough seam allowance for me to actually sew the fabric together. So what I'm doing now is I'm rearranging the pins so that everything goes back nice and taut with all of that excess fabric that I've cut away. So I'm just making sure everything is still nice and smooth. Okay, now that the pins are situated just the way I like, I'm going to use a pencil and trace along the pin line. This will be my stitching line. You can see my birds flying overhead, Bonnie and Clyde. So I'm going to use this pencil and trace the front and back on both sides. Again, this will be my stitching line. Now that the tracing is done, I'm removing all of the pins so that I can move to my sewing room and actually sew down the lines. But again, like I said earlier, because I fitted this muslin so precisely on the chair that it won't fit. It won't fit unless I cut a seam down the back and install a zipper. But if you do have a chair that doesn't have a curve and it's a straight back, this method will work perfectly. Okay, what I'm doing now, I'm cutting off the excess fabric and making it as even as possible. And still at this point, I'm not even realizing that once I actually sew it together, that I'm not going to be able to slip it onto the chair. So I'm going through the motions at this point, not even realizing it. So I'm sewing down that pencil line that I drew while on the chair. So I attempted to try to slip cover onto the chair, and of course it wouldn't even go over. So here I got another piece of muslin, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the first template over top, and I'm going to use it as a guide for the new slipcover template. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the width at the top and draw that the entire length down this piece of fabric so that the width at the top is the same as the width on the bottom. Sorry for the pause. I'm watching the Redskins and Dallas football game. This was the last game of the season and Dallas crushed us. Hail to the Redskins. I'm a forever fan. What I'm now doing is pinning along that pencil line I just drew. This will be the new stitching line. Now I'm adding a 1-inch seam allowance to both sides. I noticed that the slip cover was about 2 inches shorter, so I'm adding a note here to add 2 inches when I cut out the fabric. Here I'm just redrawing that 1-inch seam allowance on the sewing side. Another thing I noticed by enlarging the slip cover is that there's a bunch of extra fabric in the back of the slip cover. So what I'm doing here is attaching elastic all the way around the bottom of the slip cover so that it can gather in the extra fabric. Yep, the elastic did the trick. It's sucking in all that extra fabric that was billowing at the back of the chair. And you can also see that it was about 1.5 inches to 2 inches short in the back. So that's why I wrote the little note to add 2 inches when I cut out the actual fabric. So now that I'm satisfied with the way that it fits, I'm going to turn the TV off because the game is distracting. And next, I'm going to unpick or detach the elastic that I just sewed onto the sample fabric so that I can reuse on the actual fabric. I used a temporary stitch, basting stitch, so it comes out relatively easy. I also started removing the temporary stitches on the slip cover, which I didn't need to do at this time, but I didn't realize that until I actually got this side apart. Time to cut the actual fabric. This fabric is so beautiful, and I bought it at JoAnn Fabrics. So here I'm just trying to find the most efficient way to cut out the slip cover using the least amount of fabric as possible, because at this point I'm not even sure if I have enough to do all 6 chairs and to do curtains. So here I'm adding the extra 2 inches that I was originally short on. At this point, I want to ensure that I have at least an inch of extra fabric at the top for the seam allowance. So that's what I was checking for. And then I also noticed that it wasn't even on both sides of the fabric. So once I cut it here, I'm going to go back to the top of the fabric and even that out. But before I even the top of the fabric out, I'm turning the fabric right sides together because this will be the way we actually sew the pieces together. Now I return to the top of the fabric to make sure I have at least 1 inch seam allowance and that I cut off that uneven fabric so that it's nice and even at the top. I'm a little anal about my fabric being even and using the least amount of fabric as possible so that we have fabric left over to do something else with. Now I'm turning the pins perpendicular to the fabric in the way that I sew so that as I'm sewing, I can pull the pins out from the right hand side. I'm taking note of the measurement of this piece because I have 5 more pieces to cut. Now that the seams have been sewn, I'm serging all of the edges because this fabric frays really badly. To eliminate this fullness at the very top of the slip covers, I'm sewing like a triangle at both corners of the slip cover that runs both parallel and perpendicular to that side seam and that top seam. It'll give it a nice finish. Now at this point I'm hemming the slip covers, and this is about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm now attaching the elastic to the hemline so that it gathers in that fullness in the back that I showed you earlier. All right, so let's see how it looks. Let's see the fruits of our labor. Slides on pretty good, and voila, it looks so beautiful, so beautiful. Okay, so the slip covers came out nicely. I'm happy with the way they came out. With the exception of the back. There's a lot of fullness in the back, and because of that fullness, I wanted to either insert a zipper or create ties. Then because I had a lot of fabric left over, and to eliminate additional costs, I decided to add ties to the slip covers. So what I did was, please forgive my birds, they're extra loud tonight. One is stuck on top of the curtains. So please forgive them. So what I've done is I've cut out these strips. Let's see. 3.5 inches wide and 32 inches long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to serge the ends or the edges because this fabric is it frays. So I'm going to serge the ends and then I'm going to turn it in and sew maybe a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then once that's done, I'm going to attach it to the slip covers. So we're going to move to my machine, we're going to serge, and then we're going to hem. And then we'll come back to the cutting table to measure the exact spot we want to sew the ties to. So I'll see you at my serger. So now all the serging's done. Now we're going to turn it in, maybe about 1/2 inch, and sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'll meet you over there. Okay, off camera, I decided to go to the iron and press in the seam allowance so that I won't be over here fumbling, trying to keep everything even. So I pressed the hem in. This is about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now we're just going to sew all the way around. Okay, so let me clear off the table. Take one slip cover. These are the ones that I just finished hemming. So now what we're going to do is we're going to measure 12 inches from the top of the chair. Place a pin. And this is where we're going to sew the top of the slip cover to. So what I'm going to do is, actually, since I've already hemmed this edge, I don't need to do anything extra with it. So what I'm doing is I'm placing the edge of this tie right along the seam. And I'm going to pin it in place. And had I thought about attaching ties at the very beginning, I would have sandwiched this piece in between the front and the back of this and sewn it in one continuous seam. But it's all good. You'll never be able to tell a difference. I'm going to do the same for the other side. Measure down 12 inches from the top of the chair. Okay. Take the edge of the tie and place it right along the side seam. And pin in place. And so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew 2 rows of stitching on both sides. I'll see you at the machine. Okay. So now I'm going to go inside of the slip cover and get to the point where the ties actually begin. So like I said, the edge of the tie I place right along that side seam. So it'll actually look like I've sewn these pieces together as opposed to attaching the tie after the fact. So I'm just going to slide it underneath and make sure nothing is bunched up in the back. And I'm going to sew 2 rows of stitching. 1 row of stitching will be right along that seam line. And the second row of stitching will be 1/4 inch, excuse me, inward. And ladies and gents, the slip covers are done. So now let's go see how they look on the chair. Okay, so I actually finished the seat before adding the ties to the back, so you'll see the final product at the end of the video. I'm using that slip cover that I made at the beginning of the video that ended up being too narrow for the seat. So what I did was I pulled apart the side seams and then I sewed the 2 pieces together to form this big square. So now I'm going to sit the seat on top of the fabric and then I'm going to fold one end over the cushion, pulling slightly and pinning. You want to pull and pin to alleviate any ripples on the underside of the fabric. So now on the opposite side, I'm pulling the fabric even tighter so that there are no wrinkles at all on the underside as I pin. So you want to pull and pin at the same time along all of the side seams, or all on the straight sides rather. And you want to tackle these straight sides before you tackle the corners. Now in these corners, what you want to do, or what I'm doing, is I'm forming little pleats. So I'm pleating and pinching and pinning. Again, I'm pinching the fabric and forming little pleats, and they're slightly slanted to one side. Yes, look how smooth that is. Nice and smooth. Again, the trick is to pull and pin, pull and pin, or staple. Now at this point, we're cutting off the excess fabric, and I'm cutting maybe an inch or two away from my pin line. Now that I'm happy with everything, I'm going to unpin, and then I'm going to trim along the edges to sort of smoothen it out a little bit before I actually cut out the actual fabric that'll be going onto the seat. Because the fabric is folded in half, I'm able to cut out 2 seats or 2 chair covers at once, which saves me a little bit of time considering that I need to cut out 6 of them. Now this is the stapler that I'll be using to staple the fabric onto the seat cushions. But before I do that, I need to cut this fabric in half to separate the 2 seat cushions or covers, and then I will head over to my serger to finish off all 4 side seams because this fabric frays like nobody's business. Alright. Now it's time to staple the final fabric to the seat cushion. Again, the trick to a smooth finish is to pull the fabric as you're stapling. Pull the fabric taut and tight and staple. Pull and staple. Pull and staple. Now for the final reveal. The seat cover's done, and now I'm showing you the final slip cover with the ties attached to the back. I was so pleased how these turned out. And watch how that extra fullness back there disappears with just tying these ties. I'm not a very good bow tire, but I wanted to do something quick so that I didn't take too much of your time trying to do a perfect bow, but you get the point.